What if I told you that the very emotions that make you feel alive are the same ones that chain you to weakness? We cling to every feeling, joy, anger, love, fear, as if they are proof of our humanity, but what if they are the invisible strings that control us? What if the true power lies not in drowning in emotion, but in mastering the art of stillness? Imagine walking into a room where chaos is screaming, people are fighting for attention, egos are clashing, and yet you stand there untouched, unshaken, silent, but more powerful than any word they could throw at you. The world is obsessed with reaction, reacting to insults, reacting to praise, reacting to fear, reacting to love, but reaction is dependence, and dependence is weakness. The question is not whether you feel or not, the question is whether your feelings own you. What happens when you stop being a slave to emotional storm? What happens when you become untouchable? Not cold, not numb, but free. Free to choose, free to act, free to lead. Not because you feel everything, but because you can feel nothing and control everything. We live in a world that often convinces us that to be powerful is to feel deeply and to express those feelings loudly. People equate passion with strength, thinking that if they cry harder, shout louder, or love more recklessly, they are somehow proving their humanity and influence. But if you look closer, what seems like power is often fragility in disguise. Passion, unchecked, burns itself out. Anger unrestrained leaves scars on everything it touches. Even love, when tangled with dependency, can enslave rather than liberate. The misconception lies in the belief that raw emotional display is a sign of authenticity, when in reality, it often exposes the lack of self-control. History does not remember those who lost themselves in outbursts. It remembers those who mastered the fire without letting it consume them. To feel is natural, but to react blindly is surrendering authority over your own life. And yet the world keeps telling us that express yourself means lose yourself, when real strength has always been in holding back enough to direct emotion rather than drown in it. The conflict becomes even sharper when you see how society rewards drama. Look around, on screens, in politics, in relationships. The loudest voice, the biggest spectacle, the most dramatic collapse always draws the most attention. People clap for the one who breaks down publicly, but rarely respect the one who stays calm under pressure. And yet, which one has true power? Attention and power are not the same. Attention fades as quickly as it comes, but power remains in silence, in restraint, in the ability to govern oneself when the world expects chaos. The modern world glorifies vulnerability without context, convincing us that exposing every wound is the same as healing. But is it really healing? Or is it just entertainment for others to consume? The truth is, a person who cannot regulate their emotions is a person who can be steered like a ship in any storm. Barrier, they become predictable, and predictability is the easiest weakness to exploit. The misconception is not only dangerous, it is deliberately fed, because a society full of emotionally dependent people is far easier to control. Psychology has long suggested that emotions serve as signals, not commands. Anger tells us a boundary has been crossed. Fear warns us of danger. Joy signals fulfillment. But when we mistake the signal for an order, we lose perspective. We lash out in anger instead of assessing the situation. We hide in fear instead of preparing to face the challenge. We chase fleeting joy instead of building lasting meaning. Emotional maturity is the quiet ability to listen to the signal without becoming enslaved to it. Philosophers have argued for centuries that the highest form of freedom is freedom from impulse. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Yet most people live in reverse. They give all their power to outside events and let emotions dictate their state of being. The misconception that feeling more deeply equates to living more fully blinds us from the truth that what makes life rich is not the depth of our reaction, but the depth of our command. Think about it. How many mistakes in life come not from circumstances, but from the way we respond to them? A single harsh word spoken in anger can destroy a relationship that took years to build. A moment of fear can stop someone from taking a leap that might have transformed their destiny. A desperate craving for validation can make someone sell their dignity for applause that evaporates in hours. The tragedy is not the existence of emotion, but the worship of it. We have been told to treat feelings as divine commandments instead of temporary visitors passing through our minds. If you elevate them higher than reason, they will rule you. The conflict is in believing that obeying every emotion is authentic, when in fact it makes us slaves to fleeting states that care nothing for our long-term survival or growth. And yet, how many times do people repeat, "I just couldn't help it," as if that is strength, when in truth, it is the ultimate confession of weakness. This misconception is woven into culture in subtle ways. From a young age, we are taught that being emotional is being alive, that the one who cries the hardest loves the deepest, that the one who yells the loudest fights the bravest. But if you study leaders, warriors, or even survivors of harsh realities, you will find the opposite. They are not celebrated for how easily they were moved by their feelings, but for how they carried themselves, despite their feelings. The samurai practiced discipline of both mind and sword. Monks pursued stillness as the highest form of strength. Even Machiavelli noted that rulers who allowed personal emotion to dictate political action often destroyed their own stability. Yet the modern world glorifies emotional outpour as courage, when most of it is a lack of restraint. We mistake reaction for depth, but reaction requires no strength. Anyone can cry, scream, or beg. What requires strength is to stand in the fire of emotion and remain unshaken, to feel it fully, yet let it pass without bending your will. The danger in glorifying emotional indulgence is that it creates a cycle of weakness. If every emotion must be displayed, then every emotion becomes a weapon against you. Insults sting more when you believe you must react. Manipulation succeeds when you cannot resist flattery. Fear controls you when you see no option but to obey it. Entire industries thrive on this cycle. Advertising fuels desire. Social media fuels envy. Politics fuels anger, and entertainment fuels distraction. Each one plays on the misconception that emotions are proof of identity, when in reality they are levers to be pulled. The person who doesn't realize this becomes a puppet. The one who does begins to see that power is not found in chasing or displaying emotion, but in recognizing them as illusions that pass. To believe that emotional exposure is freedom is to fall into the traps set by those who benefit from your predictability. Real freedom comes from breaking that pattern. At its core, the conflict is between authenticity and control. People believe they must choose, either feel deeply and be real or control themselves and be fake. But this is a false choice. You can feel deeply and still refuse to be ruled. You can acknowledge every surge of emotion without handing over the steering wheel. To feel is human, but to control is divine. The misconception that control equals coldness prevents many from pursuing it, because they fear becoming stone. But control is not about freezing the heart. It is about mastering the flame so it warms rather than burns. When you realize this, you begin to see why the misconception has persisted so long. It flatters the ego to think that losing yourself in feeling is depth, when in truth, it is surrender. The world doesn't need more people enslaved to every passing emotion. It needs individuals who can walk through fire with steady eyes, who can feel everything, yet be owned by nothing. That is where the conflict ends and real power begins. There comes a point in life where you begin to see how often you've been steered not by reason, but by emotion. Think about the heartbreaks where you begged someone to stay, not because they were right for you, but because the pain of loss made you desperate. Think about the times you erupted in anger, saying words that tasted bitter even as they left your mouth, words that carved wounds deeper than the original offense. Or consider how a single compliment, a single gesture of approval, made you lower your guard, trust too quickly, or compromise your boundaries. These aren't isolated incidents, they are patterns. And in these moments, what controlled you was not the event itself, but the emotional storm it triggered. Transformation begins when you realize that being human does not mean being predictable, that every reaction you thought was natural was actually conditioned. The world expected you to break, to chase, to lash out, and you did. But the awakening starts when you pause, when you ask, do I want to keep being predictable, or do I want to start being free? Everywhere you look, people are caught in invisible strings of emotional manipulation. Social media thrives on it. The dopamine rush of likes, the sting of being ignored, the constant comparison that breeds envy. Relationships, too, often become battlegrounds of emotional leverage, where silence is punishment, anger is control, and affection is a bargaining chip. At work, recognition is dangled like a prize, and fear of failure drives decisions more than logic or vision. We are conditioned to crave the highs and dread the lows, as though life is nothing but a roller coaster of feeling. But once you notice the pattern, you cannot unsee it. You start to realize how much of your life was dictated not by choice, but by a need to feel something, anything. And then, a quiet question enters. What would it mean if I no longer needed this constant pull? The very idea seems terrifying at first, because we are addicted to stimulation. But on the other side of that terror is something else. Clarity. Transformation is rarely dramatic. It doesn't come in a single burst of light or a sudden overnight change. More often, it comes in small moments that feel insignificant at the time. The first time you don't respond to a text designed to provoke you. The first time you smile at an insult, not out of arrogance, but because you see it for what it is, noise. The first time you walk away from validation, not because you don't want it, but because you no longer need it. These are the moments where the shift happens, where you begin to recognize the freedom in choosing not to react. And each time you succeed, you grow stronger. Slowly, predictability fades. People can no longer pull your strings with guilt, flattery, or fear. You become something rare in this world. A person who cannot be easily swayed. That quiet strength, that invisible shield, is what transformation truly looks like. It doesn't announce itself, but it changes everything. Still, this path is not without resistance. People will call you cold, detached, unfeeling. They will project their own dependence onto you, accusing you of lacking depth simply because you no longer drown in emotional tides as they do. And that criticism will sting, at first. But in time you realize that their judgment is not about you, but about the discomfort they feel in facing their own lack of control. It takes courage to resist the urge to prove them wrong, to explain that your detachment is not numbness but discipline, not weakness but freedom. And as you learn to stand firm, the noise fades. You begin to see that those who misunderstand you are still slaves to the very forces you are freeing yourself from. Their world is built on reaction, yours is becoming built on choice. And choice, though quieter, is infinitely stronger than reaction. Transformation is not about convincing others, it is about refusing to betray yourself. With this shift comes a profound change in how you see pain. Where once you feared it, avoided it, or surrendered to it, you now begin to see it as a teacher. Heartbreak becomes less about devastation and more about clarity, showing you what you will never again allow yourself to endure. Failure no longer defines you but refines you, stripping away illusions and sharpening your vision. Even rejection becomes less of a wound and more of a mirror, reflecting where your worth was misplaced. Pain stops being a reason to break and becomes a reason to grow. And that is the essence of transformation, not the absence of suffering, but the refusal to let suffering dictate the course of your life. When you can face pain without crumbling, when you can hold it without letting it own you, you begin to carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. You stop fearing storms because you have already learned that you are the sky. As you transform, relationships take on a new light. You no longer crave connection to fill a void or to soothe insecurity. Instead, you approach people from a place of wholeness, offering without clinging, loving without losing yourself, giving without needing control. When you no longer depend on external validation, your presence shifts. Suddenly you become someone others cannot manipulate. Your value does not fluctuate based on their approval or rejection. And paradoxically, this makes your connections deeper and more genuine, because they are no longer built on desperation. People who once sought to exploit your predictability will fall away, while those drawn to your steadiness will remain. This is where transformation ripples outward. Not through grand speeches or declarations, but through the quiet way your strength redefines the space around you. You are no longer someone who reacts, you are someone who leads, even if you lead only yourself, and that is enough. The most powerful transformation is internal, invisible to the eye but undeniable in presence. It is the shift from being ruled by every passing wave of feeling to becoming the one who decides when and how to move. You realize that emotions are not enemies, but neither are they gods. They are messengers, and you are the master of the message. Where once you sought to escape them, now you let them come and go. knowing they no longer dictate your worth or your choices. Freedom feels like standing on solid ground after years of drifting in open water. It is quiet, almost unnerving at first, but then it becomes the most valuable state you can carry. Transformation is not about becoming unfeeling. It is about becoming untouchable, not by running from emotion, but by rising above it. And in that space, you finally discover the truth. Power was never about controlling others. It was always about controlling yourself. There is a kind of strength that cannot be measured in muscles or achievements. A strength that reveals itself only in the quiet moments when no one is watching. It is forged not in applause but in solitude, when you sit alone with your thoughts and realize you have to face them, unfiltered. Most people fear silence because in silence their emotions echo too loudly. They seek distraction, anything to drown out the discomfort of being with themselves. But awakening begins when you stop running. When you allow yourself to sit with the pain, the scars, the insecurities that have chased you for years and you do not flinch. At first it feels unbearable. Your heart races, memories sting, emotions roar like a storm. Yet slowly, you realize the storm passes, and you remain. That realization changes everything. You discover that inner strength isn't about eliminating struggle, but about refusing to be swept away by it. It is about standing firm in the center of your own chaos, realizing that your worth does not disappear just because the world around you is unsteady. Think of the scars you carry, both visible and invisible. For so long, perhaps you have hidden them, ashamed of what they reveal. Maybe you believed they made you weak, damaged, unworthy of love or respect. But scars are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of survival. Every mark, every ache, every lesson written into your being is proof that you endured, that you refused to disappear when life tried to erase you. Awakening is when you stop wishing the scars away and instead start wearing them as armor. They do not define you, but they remind you of what you have already overcome. When the world tries to shake you again, those scars whisper, "You have been here before, and you are still here." Inner strength does not erase pain. It absorbs it, transforms it, and uses it as fuel. And when you reach that point, you realize you are not fragile at all. You are unbreakable, precisely because you have been broken and rebuilt. There is also a beauty in restraint that few understand. Anyone can shout, anyone can retaliate, anyone can let anger or fear explode outward. But the one who pauses, who breathes, who decides rather than reacts, that person holds a rare kind of power. Restraint is not suppression, it is mastery. It is knowing that your silence can say more than 1,000 words, that your stillness can hold more weight than the loudest outburst. This is why the most powerful presences are often the quietest ones. They do not waste energy proving themselves, they do not scatter their strength trying to win validation. Their control speaks louder than noise ever could. Awakening is when you understand that you do not have to fight every battle to prove your worth. Sometimes the greatest victory is in not fighting at all, because you have already won within yourself. The calm you carry unsettles those who live on reaction, because they cannot shake someone who refuses to be moved by their chaos. Light and darkness play an important role in this awakening. At first, silence feels like darkness, empty, isolating, oppressive. But as you endure it, you begin to see the faint light breaking through, a kind of clarity that only comes when the noise is gone. The light is not dramatic, it does not blind you with sudden revelation. Instead, it is subtle, like dawn creeping over a horizon, showing you that what you feared was never as overwhelming as it seemed. You begin to see emotions differently, not as enemies or dictators, but as passing clouds drifting across a vast sky. You are the sky, wide and constant, while the clouds come and go. Sometimes they are heavy and dark, sometimes light and fleeting, but they never stay forever. This imagery shifts everything. Instead of identifying with the storm, you identify with the stillness that holds it. That is awakening, the realization that your essence is not tied to temporary states, but to something eternal within you that no storm can destroy. The journey toward inner strength often requires solitude. In a world addicted to noise, to constant connection, to endless distraction, solitude feels like punishment. But solitude is where the deepest growth happens. It strips you of the masks you wear for others and forces you to face your raw, unedited self. At first, solitude reveals your fears, the fear of being unworthy, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being alone forever. But as you remain with it, something shifts. You begin to see that solitude is not emptiness, but space. Space to breathe, to think, to heal. It becomes the soil where resilience takes root. And from that soil grows a strength so profound that when you step back into the noise of the world, you are no longer swayed by it. You carry your solitude with you, a kind of inner sanctuary that no one can take away. Awakening is realizing that you do not need the world to validate your existence, because you have already found enough within yourself. When you awaken to this strength, you also awaken to your worth. You stop measuring it by the reactions of others, by how much attention you receive, by how loudly the world applauds you. You understand that worth is not external, it is intrinsic, woven into your being from the moment you were born. This realization changes how you move through life. You no longer chase love out of desperation because you already know you are enough. You no longer cling to validation because you validate yourself. You no longer fear rejection because rejection cannot take away what was never dependent on another's approval. This quiet confidence is not arrogance, it is self-respect. And with it, you stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces where you are not valued. You stop bending to emotional manipulation. You walk with a steadiness that says, I know who I am, and nothing you do can change that. This is the kind of strength that cannot be shaken, because it is rooted not in circumstance, but in essence. And as this awakening deepens, you begin to see the world differently. You no longer view challenges as punishments, but as opportunities to practice your strength. You no longer see pain as an enemy, but as a sculptor shaping you into something sharper, wiser, more resilient. You embrace the scars, the solitude, the storms, not because they are easy, but because they are the training ground of your soul. You recognize that the people who tried to break you were in fact teachers, unwilling ones perhaps, but teachers nonetheless. You stop wishing for an easier life and start cultivating a stronger spirit, and in this shift you find peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going right, but the unshakable peace that remains even when everything goes wrong. Inner strength and awakening are not about escaping life, but about engaging with it fully. With eyes open and heart steady, it is the realization that while the world may tremble, you remain rooted, carrying a light that no darkness can extinguish. To feel nothing is not to become hollow, but to step into the clarity that few dare to seek. Life constantly tells us that to be human is to be reactive, that every insult should sting, that every compliment should thrill, that every loss should destroy. But what happens when you begin to step outside of that cycle? What happens when you learn that you are more than the reactions the world demands from you? Empowerment begins in this realization. That silence is not emptiness, that restraint is not weakness, and that emotional discipline is the truest form of freedom. The world measures strength in noise, in the ability to strike back, to cry louder, to show more vulnerability for the eyes of others. But strength, in its highest form, does not need an audience. It does not scream for recognition. It is felt, in the way you remain steady when life tries to pull you apart, in the way you rise again, without demanding anyone's applause. When you feel nothing, you are not detached from life. You are rooted in yourself, untouchable, no longer at the mercy of storms that once owned you. The revolution that matters is not fought with weapons or crowds or banners. It is fought in the stillness of your own mind. People imagined freedom as overthrowing others, as taking control of systems, as breaking chains someone else has placed on them. But the real chains are often invisible, forged from your own attachment to validation, your own dependence on reaction, your own surrender to emotional highs and lows. To conquer those chains is the greatest act of rebellion. It is saying, I will not be enslaved by what is temporary. I will not hand my life to emotions that rise and fall like waves. Instead, I will be the ocean beneath, vast, unmoved, eternal. The empowering reflection is that you do not need to change the world to find peace. You only need to master yourself, and when you do, the world around you begins to shift, not because it has changed, but because your lens has. What once threatened you becomes powerless. What once defined you becomes irrelevant. Imagine how different your life would look if no one's words could wound you, if no rejection could shatter you, if no praise could inflate you. Imagine the freedom of walking into any space and carrying your worth like a silent flame that cannot be extinguished. You would no longer chase relationships out of fear of being alone. You would no longer compromise your integrity to earn fleeting approval. You would no longer break yourself down just to fit into places that do not deserve you. This is not indifference. It is sovereignty. It is reclaiming the throne of your own life, sitting firmly where emotions once sat, and deciding that your choices will not be dictated by the turbulence of feelings. That steadiness is not only empowering, it is magnetic. People sense when someone is untouchable, when they carry an energy that cannot be manipulated. And while the world may not always understand it, they cannot help but respect it, because strength in silence speaks louder than 1,000 words ever could. This awakening does not mean you will never feel again. You will still love, still grieve, still celebrate, still hope. But the difference is that these emotions will flow through you without chaining you. Love will not blind you into losing yourself. Grief will not drown you into forgetting who you are. Hope will not deceive you into clinging to illusions. You will feel everything, yet you will not be ruled by anything. That is the essence of power, to experience life fully while remaining the master of your inner world. When others crumble under pressure, you will remain calm. When others are intoxicated by praise, you will remain grounded. When others are broken by loss, you will carry your scars as proof of survival. In that steadiness lies freedom. It is not about building walls. It is about building roots so deep that no storm can rip you apart. The empowering reflection is that strength is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of unwavering self-command. The call to action is not loud or desperate. It is silent, soulful, and deeply personal. Ask yourself, what patterns have owned you? What reactions have stolen your freedom? What emotions have dictated your choices and led you into prisons disguised as passions? Reflect on the moments you lost yourself chasing what you thought would make you whole, and then envision what life could become if you reclaimed that power, if you no longer bowed to temporary feelings but stood rooted in something unshakable. The change begins not tomorrow, not next year, but in the very next moment you are tested. It begins when someone tries to provoke you and you remain calm, when life tries to overwhelm you and you remain still, when emotions rise like a tide and you remember. You are not the tide, you are the shore. The revolution starts small, but each choice strengthens you, and as you strengthen, you step into a life few ever taste, a life of mastery, dignity, and freedom. In the end, what remains is not the chaos of emotions, but the clarity of your essence. Everything external, validation, rejection, applause, criticism, will fade with time. But the strength you cultivate within, the self-control you master, the freedom you build by refusing to be enslaved by feelings, this endures. Empowerment is not in the eyes of the crowd. It is in the quiet way you walk through life, knowing that nothing outside can define you. The real revolution was never about bending the world to your will. It was about no longer allowing the world to bend you. That is the deepest victory, the rarest freedom, the most powerful transformation. So let the world misunderstand, let them call you detached, let them say you feel nothing, for in truth you are the one who feels everything, but is ruled by nothing. You are the one who has chosen sovereignty over slavery, silence over noise, clarity over chaos, and in that choice you have discovered the truth. When you feel nothing, you control everything.